but I never had parents that were entrepreneurs. And so I don't know growing up, if I had been in that environment, do you get to the other end and you're like, that's what I want to do? Or do you get to the other end and say, no, I'm good. I'm going to go to town and get a job.
Welcome to the Workhorse Podcast, where we dig deep into the grit, passion, and strategy behind building a successful rural business. We're your hosts.
I'm Kendall Ballantyne, owner of Central Park Farms and marketing for farmers.
And I'm Jessica Garza, owner of Moose Valley Ranch and founder of Market in the Mountains.
This podcast is for hardworking female farmers and rural entrepreneurs who are ready to turn their dreams into thriving businesses. From deep diving business strategies that actually work to balancing farm family life and everything in between.
We're here to give you practical tools, candid insights, and a healthy dose of community support. If you're looking for women who actually cheer you on, are willing to tell you the hard truths, and that understand how much it can throw off your day when the cows get out, you're in the right spot.
This podcast is for the doers, the women who don't stay in one spot for too long, for the workhorses.
We have been talking about this topic probably our entire relationship. Like the entire length that we've known each other. It's one of the most discussed topics if you think around the table, like around the safe table where people feel comfortable sharing and are kind of opening up. We even called it out by name in the write-up stuff we did for the Workhorse podcast. And it is that family relationship conversation that comes from generational businesses, operating on family land, family businesses navigating multiple generations in it, and first generation businesses figuring out what that looks like to hand it down to their own children.
Which is the thing that I'm dealing with right now, for sure.
The most difficult conversation.
And it's the one people don't want to talk about publicly, and I get why. Even you and I, like when we were talking about this, I mean, we were sitting there in the hot tub, having a morning cup of coffee, hanging out, having this conversation. And it was like, hey, we need to table this conversation and get it recorded. But there's always that underlining feeling of, you know, like the family could listen to it and the people that we're in business with in our family, or that we need to be able to have good relationships. And how do you have that transparent conversation that's so helpful to other women in the community with you, while also making sure that you're not making your own family relationships, you know, a little bit more strained during the conversation in the first place?
Yeah, I don't enjoy this topic being public, but I understand and believe the necessity behind sharing the story. Because if there was anything that I saw in law enforcement, so for 3.5 years, I covered the road, we call it, as a deputy, where you actively respond to the incoming 911 calls. And that meant arguments, DVs, anything like
DV.
that.
What's DV? Sorry.
Domestic violence. That's okay.
Sorry.
So you're out and responding. And so not only did I see it in my own community, I saw it on calls. And you kind of hear, like when the police are called, it's never anyone's good day. And so you sort of hear like the worst of the worst. And usually people are very like emotionally raw during those situations. So they're kind of like spilling everything, and you learn more that you didn't even want to know. But in the course of them dealing with the trauma, whatever is happening that's caused them to call 911, you sort of become a law enforcement officer / counselor / community member. And it delved into, and I was always shocked because I live and I worked at that time in a very rural community where there was lots of families in business together, lots of properties with multiple generations on them. I was always shocked by what I saw.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I can only imagine too how that lens of law enforcement changes your perspective because of all the things you've seen versus me. I have a very narrow idea of what that looks like. I don't come from a multi-generational farming family. I'm a first-generation producer. I married a multi-generational producer, but our business is not the family business. Jay had retired from agriculture with his family, closed that business. When he and I met, I opened my own farm, to which Jay has joined. So my concept of that family dynamic is a lot different.
Yeah, I've got an interesting filter. You add the law enforcement side of it, then you add the sandwich generation because I've got the generation above me. and then the generation below me that I'm trying to ensure has a place in the family business. And then you filter it through law enforcement. And I was raised with a dad who we grew up hearing the 5 Ds of how to lose a family farm: death, divorce, drugs, disinterest, and disability. My dad loves that saying. I grew up hearing it over and over and over again. Like, this is how you lose the family farm. And now he's added even more letters, which I couldn't tell you what they stand for. He just keeps finding new reasons why he thinks that like estates don't get handed down. But that always stuck with me, those 5 reasons. And I found it to be very true. Like when you test the theory in the law enforcement world and what you responded to, and then the conversation sitting around the table with other women in these situations, those 5 things were the tried and true tested reasons. Like it kept coming back to one of those.
And I feel like we've had that conversation so many times, and it ends up, where you start sharing your story, Jess, or I start kind of sharing the questions that I have as we set up a plan for the kids in our house of what that's going to look like for them. We're not ready to retire or anything like that. But, things happen, accidents, as especially happen. And every time that topic comes up, it'll be like all of a sudden somebody's in tears, or all of a sudden somebody who, their business looks totally pulled together on social media is just pouring out to us. It just becomes like this big emotional hangover, like this release of feeling seen, feeling heard, finally being able to talk to somebody who's in a like-minded situation or who has their own perspective on how things are going. And it's always so surprising, like I said, because I'm first generation, of how many people have some version of that happening within their family dynamic.
Well, and I think that's the important part, right? Is that from the outside perspective, the not going in as law enforcement, the non-vulnerable, like from the outside world, it looks so great. They maybe are multi-generational. They have all these resources and capital that has just been accumulated. And what you don't hear is the behind the scenes, and you don't see all of the different ways that stuff can gut you over.
For sure. And I think as a first generation producer, because I didn't have any knowledge of the industry, all I was hearing when I first started out in farming, I was going to different farming events, and a lot of those farming events in my area were really geared towards first generation farmers. And it was always kind of this like divisive language about how it's like so much harder for first generation farmers. And, it's so much easier because you get land passed down, and all of those things becomes the narrative. And I had kind of a unique perspective in that my husband isn't first generation. So like I understood that dynamic from his end of things, but then I was also experiencing my own experience of being a first generation producer. But I was constantly hearing the narrative from first generation producers that I was in community with of like how much easier it would be if you just had a family farm passed down.
I will unequivocally argue that to my grave.
And I think there's hard things like outside of the family succession planning in general, there's things that are a benefit and there's things that are, a little bit hard.
Can we just full stop on that? As women, can we please just start to acknowledge that everybody has a heart?
Yes.
Everybody.
Yes.
Can we stop using language that judges, that puts this sort of you must have it so much better because X, Y, and Z, when you have no idea what that woman is walking through? And I'm talking in everything. I'm talking judging her for feeding her kid McDonald's. I'm talking for the fact that she inherited some tractors. I'm talking for the fact that she's trying to purchase her first acreage of land. Like, can we as a whole, and I'm sure I have inadvertently done it. I'm sure there are times you say one thing right and you didn't intend for that to be the purpose. But I'm over the like judgment. You must have it so much easier than I do.
100%. And
I've never met a woman that is like, I'm just doing so great all the time. Everything is wonderful.
Or they might be saying that. And then later when they're actually being truthful about it, where it's actually, they feel like they're in a safe and comfortable space to share, then suddenly, they're able to be a bit more vulnerable and actually sharing what's going on. It's been an interesting journey for me, for sure, coming from that first generation. And now the kids are older. So I don't have biological kids. I have 2 stepkids. One's 20, one's 18. And then I have a niece and a nephew who are also not biologically mine. Very interesting dynamic. My niece and nephew used to live with me. They are actually my husband's ex-wife's sister's kids. So it's a very disconnected, but I have a really great relationship with them. And because I don't have biological kids, now planning estate planning, like I've heard all of these different stories from friends through the years of how they wished that they had more clear understanding of their family's estate planning or a better succession plan in place. And it's really kind of been driven home to me. And I've never experienced the other end of it, but it makes me really want to make sure that I'm setting our kids up the best as possible. And it's a really unique dynamic in our family. Some of the kids want to be involved in the farm. Some of them do not want to be involved in the farm, and just how to set up the assets that our company owns to not shortchange the ones who do want to stay involved in the company while still respecting the kids who don't want to be involved in the family business. And it's just such a challenging thing to navigate.
I don't think there's ever a right answer. And I'll be honest with you, in hundreds of calls and responses and situations and conversations with the women, never once have I heard someone walk out the other end of a succession plan after a death or whatever the cause is for that divorce that just goes, yeah, we nailed it 100%. That was exactly what we needed to do and how, and all of the implications were covered in our documents. Never once. Never.
I can't imagine like going through the process now of really trying to put pen to paper with that plan. Not only do I know that plan is not going to be good forever because things have evolved within our business. We add properties. We have gotten rid of properties. We have diversified into different things. Who knows? Like Jagger, as it stands right now, wants to be involved in the family business. He works for the business now. He plans to be involved when he graduates, but who knows, right? Like he's in grade 12. Who knows? He might come and do 1 year full time. He's got incredible job opportunities. He's already been offered jobs that pay, frankly, better than we can pay. So it's whether or not he actually wants to be part of the family, not because being part of the family farm, not because it's necessarily the most lucrative in comparison to some of the other things that he can do in life.
I just look back. I look at that situation. I have 2 young boys, young-ish. I feel like every time I think they're still toddlers, but they're not. I mean, they are in elementary school and they both have their egg stand at the farm. So they're starting to learn what money looks like and that they can earn money out here. And they're watching all the things that we do. They're also watching us work traditional jobs at the same time that we're doing the ranch. And then watching, I have a sibling that doesn't work full-time off. So he's 100% on the farm. And they're watching sort of the just situations and the day-to-day and what do the responsibilities look like. And they're starting to ask questions and it's really hard. We try super hard to not treat them like children and to have these conversations about like, this is why mom and dad continue to work off the ranch. Like these are our goals and it requires X amount of revenue. And to get there, this is how we chose to do that. You could have done this. You could have done that. And I was raised by a dad that he will give you 19 options. He has a plan A through plan D, section F, contingency plan 2. He loves to give us every option under the sun and then really struggles with executing which plan we're going to go on. We could hammer it to death, which one is the perfect option because there's so many options. And we try to walk that line between our children of showing them that you have to take a step. You have to take an action, even if it's the wrong action, you can correct it, you can step sideways, you can move whichever way you want. So we try to walk that sort of line with the boys of showing them that you need to consider everything, you need contingencies, you need to really think about the implications of one decision having the rippling effect of what it can, but that also you can't just stay in one spot and do nothing. Like doing nothing is never the answer.
For sure. It's been such a unique, and I know you talking to the boys and the boys having that unique perspective of watching you chase your dreams and watching you guys have a business. And it's something that we've really, I don't want to say struggled with, but it's always been this thing with the kids when they were growing up. They saw how much work we had to do to make this all work. And sometimes certain kids are inspired by that and they want to be involved in that. And then some kids are like, hold on, that is not the work-life balance that I want to have. That is not what I want to be involved in. I do not want to work. I want to go and take a vacation for my 2 weeks holidays every year. And I think that that's especially been obvious in our family dynamic because the kids go between their mom's house and our house growing up, and they see one household owning businesses and working crazy hours and like putting in all this work, attempting to build the legacy of the farm. And then the other family doesn't have that same kind of business where it takes so much of what you need to be able to like grow what we're trying to grow, especially when they were young. Like we were at 2 farmers markets every weekend. It was like, you know, at mom's house, you can go camping. And at our house, we're going to farmers markets on the weekend. And that is part of the reason that we started to move away from doing markets and made some of those changes at the season of life that we needed to. But it's a unique thing to grow up in. I can only imagine. My parents had, I don't want to say 9-to-5 jobs. My mom actually worked 2 full-time jobs when I was growing up for a period of time. I don't even physically understand how you can do that, but she used to work 2 full-time jobs. My dad worked incredible hours. They were always, my mom was always there for me. It's so crazy. I look back and I'm like, how that woman worked 2 full-time jobs and she was still like baking cookies for the bake sale, helping me with homework is insane to me. But I never had parents that were entrepreneurs. And so I don't know growing up, if I had been in that environment, do you get to the other end and you're like, that's what I want to do? Or do you get to the other end and say, no, I'm good. I'm going to go to town and get a job.
I mean, I grew up with it. I grew up with a stay-at-home mom. And stay-at-home is such a misnomer for what it was that she did. I mean, she farmed full-time while my dad worked to pay for the farm. And she ranched full-time. And my parents had 500 pair of cattle. And she has the best story about like a bull being down in the field and she had little kids and she didn't know. She thought it was just sleeping, like that she just kept seeing it asleep because she couldn't get out in the field to check on it. And then by the time they realized it, like the thing was frozen or something out in the field. And the vet's like, how did you not know? She's like, I have 2 kids at home. My husband's traveling for work. I'm trying to farm and ranch and feed and do all the things and just didn't realize it. And so I grew up with a stay-at-home mom in quotation marks. And then a dad who traveled extensively for work. He was like a regional sales guy who would be driving from Washington to Montana to Northern California and then back up. And they had rental properties at one point and they had second homes and they just had all these other things happening. And so I saw that and I think I was the epitome of like, there's no way in hell. I don't want to do this. I don't want to live my life like this. I don't want to be stressing all year long if we're going to make the massive payment at the end of the year. I don't want to have my income dependent upon what the markets are doing. I want to know that I go to work, I make my money. I had a Pinterest board that was labeled for my first 6-figure paycheck, and I was off to law school. Never coming back. I had no belief that there was space for me at the ranch in the sense of like monetary ability to raise a family. I didn't believe that it was possible on the ranch. And so off I went. It never felt like it was for me. My brother had always farmed, had been taught to farm. He was down in the barn with my dad, learned all the things, farmed through high school, farmed through college. Like you knew that's what he was doing. And I didn't feel like I mean, to be frank, I didn't feel like that was a possibility for me because he had been given that option. So I had to go find something else.
And I think that, yeah, like that's what for me it is that one has felt like maybe that isn't what she wants out of her life. And one feels like that is what he wants out of his life. So then I know you ended up coming back. And so now you've got the unique situation of you've created a different business entity. So you're not farming the ranch, but you are doing everything that's not agricultural related with the property. And then your brother is farming the property. And so that feels like a different situation than I'm trying to battle, which is if one kid wants to farm the proper farm and one kid doesn't want to farm, like when you left to go do policing, what would you have expected that succession plan to look like if there had been one in place for you when you were, off to Montana doing the thing? Like, what would that have looked like? And what would have satisfied you?
I don't even know that satisfying is a word that you can use in that situation because again, what would have satisfied me would have probably sent my brother off into a tailspin if he thought that that's what I wanted. Because in his eyes, and now I don't want to put words in his mouth, I've never had this conversation with him, but it feels to me like in his eyes, I left. I got to leave. I got to go do the things. And so why would I get the asset of it when I already got to leave? I think that that is one of the biggest fatal flaws that I could identify is there was no communication over that. Had something happened to my parents when I lived in Montana and was married, had a career, had a baby, lived out of state, had something happened and it rolled down that it was, I don't know, because I have no idea what it was, 50-50 ownership, it would have ripped apart what there was of a relationship there. Because, and justifiably so, I would have been scrambling. What the heck am I supposed to do? I have a full-time job over here, a house payment. How am I supposed to get to the ranch and do these things? Because I hadn't planned that that's what it was supposed to be. And then you would have been left with my sibling that's, the hell, how did she get half? Like, she's not even here. She's not doing the work. She doesn't even know how to start a tractor if she was. And so that kind of cuts right to the core of it, that I don't think there is a way that could have satisfied it, but what could have happened was communication about what that expectation was. The last thing, we had a break, the last thing we knew was in order to inherit, you had to have a college degree. That was like kind of the last conversation at the end of high school. We expect you to get a college degree because at that time, that was like the way to get ahead. In my parents' generation, I think that's rapidly changing. We don't have that same intention with our kids. But then there was nothing else. Nothing. And so at the time, I do think it should have been conveyed. Like when businesses are being created, when revenue starts to pick up, when you start handing off things like it's no longer dad selling the hay, it's son selling the hay, daughters here off to the side, I feel like those conversations need to happen. And it upsets me that it didn't happen in my own family.
And I think that's why we're starting to have that conversation. Like Jagger's getting to the point where he's ready to graduate. He's like 6 months out. We're going to have that conversation. And now being in the position that I'm in, I see why some people don't want to have the conversation, because I know that conversation, based on at least where my gut's at with it right now, I know it's going to be a unique dynamic between Jay and I, because they're his biological kids. They're not my biological kids. They will be getting the assets. But I started Central Park Farms, and he's like, we are partners. We are absolute business partners. We are 50-50 ownership, but I started the farm. And so there's like a unique perspective in how that gets handed down, and whether or not it's just the land or whether or not it's the actual physical business that ends up getting handed down, that is to be seen. But it's going to be a conversation that I'm sure there'll be some hurt feelings or confusion, but I think it's not caring if we don't have the conversation. Like, I don't think we're doing anyone any favors if we don't have the hard talk and have the hard conversation and figure out where we lie with it, especially like Dayton, my nephew. He used to be farm manager. He's not anymore. He's moved on to another career. Paige was never employed by the company. I mean, I shouldn't say that. She was employed by the company when she was like probably 14 and 15. And then I think she got fired. Yeah, she did. She got fired, but her and Georgia got fired because they were on their phones. And then Jay made them go in and do housework. And then they realized, oh, hang on, we can work out on the farm and get paid, or we can do housework for free. And so then they were back out onto the farm. But it's been an interesting dynamic having employed them at the ages that they were, where they were getting paychecks and then some not being with the farm anymore. It's just a really complicated and complex dynamic that we are going to have to figure out. Running a rural business isn't for the faint of heart. Whether you're growing crops, raising livestock, or building a small town business, you know the challenges and the rewards better than anyone.
That's why we created the Workhorse Collective, a monthly coaching membership designed for rural business owners and farmers who want practical marketing strategies, real community, and results that actually matter. Gain expert guidance and live sessions tailored to your unique challenges. Connect with other driven business owners who share your values, get professional feedback to fine-tune your marketing and grow your business. Join on your terms with flexible options that fit even the busiest schedules.
This isn't fluff or theory. It's hands-on support from people who live and breathe rural businesses, just like you.
Visit the link in today's show notes to learn more and become part of a community that's working smarter, not harder, to grow thriving rural businesses. The Workhorse Collective, real tools, real results, and real connection.
Because when rural businesses succeed, our communities thrive.
I would argue that it's downright negligent not to have the conversations. Truly, it's hard. And there are feelings, and there is emotions, and there's money, and there is land, and there is heritage and legacy, and all of these dynamics at play. I think that the sooner you have the conversation, the sooner that it is just normal to express what you need and want, what you're looking at, and you're sharing that, you sort of cultivate this environment that conversation is normal and that you're heard and respected. When you don't do that and things fester and they become like a sore, a wound that needs to be lanced, now you have this space of conflict and you have this sort of, we're going to have a huge blow up and try to recover from it. Whereas if that conversation had been happening from the time we were in high school, it wouldn't reach the sort of crescendo that you think it's going to when you hold off. So we have that conversation early and often. We already talked to our children about it, but we also, and I think this is an important piece not to forget, especially those in the older generation. And I say this, I love my parents dearly, but I know that this is a sticking point for them. Talking about your own mortality is hard. And when you reach an age where you are imminently facing that, it's even harder if you aren't used to talking about it.
100%. I see that with my in-laws too. And it is not a conversation that I ever want to step forward into in the relationship with my in-laws, because as much as we operate some of our business on their property, we have a house in Grand Forks in our ranching community, we own a home here, but then we also rent a home from my in-laws on their original farm. And it's a delicate situation. So me and my business is intertwined with land that I don't own, that is owned by my in-laws. And then we have some of our land that we own. And it is a delicate balancing act. And it's not a conversation that I feel comfortable coming forward to them as the daughter-in-law, for whatever reason, just doesn't feel super comfortable for me. But I do see that same thing. And I do understand that there's that sensitivity. My in-laws, they're in their 80s, and there is sensitivity towards that and how hard that would be. But it absolutely makes impact to decisions in real time that we make in our business, is whether or not we're going to pour into something that then we're going to need to pour into something else to get us back to that same level within our business, which isn't a good position to be in. Thankfully, like they've blessed us a lot in, giving us opportunities on the property that they own, which we've been really lucky for. But when we have those conversations about like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if you had some land that you were just able to access for free? I'm like, yeah, but you know what? It's also nice to have control of land. Like, there is a different dynamic there.
Yeah. And I think I have a hard time understanding. I really struggle to grasp this hesitation to discuss morality, because in law enforcement, I mean, it's beat into you. You could die at any moment. Anyone could kill you anytime. Every traffic stop is a potential for you to be shot and killed. You can't even leave the academy without a will in place. And as a 23-year-old trooper cadet, putting together your will as you're sitting there and you're like, well, I really don't like,
I don't
guess
have
my
anything.
my like truck and my checking account. And I guess the student loan payments could go to mom and dad.
Who's getting the $43 in my bank account is what I really need to know, is who's getting
and
that.
then you're like, if I could die tomorrow, I guess I'll just go buy that kayak for the weekend, because shoot, we're facing this. But that conversation becomes so commonplace in that profession,
for sure,
that it gets really hard when someone is super reluctant to discuss it. Because I'm like, what are like the 3 things that are guaranteed in life? Birth, taxes, and death.
And honestly, in our friendship, I feel like I've become like, I feel like I was jarred by that when we first started our friendship, is just how, no, but it's the truth, is just
Yeah.
how like matter of fact you are about certain things. And at the beginning, it was like, oh my gosh, like she just said the thing. And then it was like, okay, so now I find that I am also much more willing to accept certain realities that maybe made me uncomfortable before. But when it comes to this freaking topic, I feel not brave. Like I'm normally very brave. I'm normally very confident. And I think as confident as I am, and as much as I know I need to go forward with it, and those conversations have already started, it's not that we're hiding from the reality of what it is. We are absolutely having that. It's just that I'm the daughter-in-law and I'm the stepmom. And those two things, and I am the business owner. Like I am the founder of the business that now is the partnership of Jay and I. It's like, it's a doozy. And it's not saying that that's an easy conversation for biological parents to have by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not saying one is harder than the other. I just only have the perspective of a step parent, and step parent dynamics can sometimes be super fantastic and sometimes be a little strained. They can be one way with one of the kids and a different way with a different one of the kids. Just like I'm sure parenting. Like
I was going to say, let me full stop you.
Like I'm sure biologically that's also the thing, but it will always be blamed if somebody's feelings are hurt on the step parent. In my opinion, especially in my dynamic, because I was face and founder of CPF from the start. And the property that we own for the ranch, Jay and I bought. Like, it wasn't his family property that was inherited where it should, like, Jay and I bought that property together. So it is not Jay's family property that's being passed down. It is jointly owned. It was purchased together. So if somebody's feelings get hurt, chances are somebody's feelings are going to get hurt by their stepmom.
Well, it's always the default, right? It's easier,
right?
It's easier to blame someone that's one step removed. And I do feel, I would agree, I'm not a step parent, but I would agree with you that the term step in and of itself has this sort of connotation that's very easy to pull out, especially if you are highly emotional, an emotionally charged conversation. It kind of just becomes like the go-to. But I don't think it is any different in a biological situation. And it's not any different in like the changing of the wind. Like we all have to accept that each and every person at the table is human. Each and every person's desires, wants, needs, goals, dreams can change. I mean, I was in Montana. I was never coming home. I was going to do my 20 years in a uniform over there. We were looking at a cool little cabin outside of, I don't even know, some mountain range. You know, I mean, we had this whole plan all the way through retirement. This is what we were going to do. And all of a sudden, things changed for us. And for a multitude of reasons, we decided to move, quote unquote, home because we were both from the state of Washington. And my parents could not have planned for that. They couldn't have at 18 put contingencies in the will for if and when I wanted to come home, because I wasn't representing that. Even if you'd asked me, I would have been like, nah, peace out, dude. I'm never coming back. But I think what's like super important to remember is whatever you do put in writing can be changed.
Yes.
On a dime.
Yes.
And I think putting something in writing is the tool to ensure that when the emergency occurs, if an emergency occurs, because it can and it will happen, is ensuring that at that time, the best next step is clearly laid out that can be changed at any point after that.
And that's what I keep having to remind myself, that just because we have a plan in place and a plan legally in documentation, that it is not set in stone, that it can adapt, because I have seen so much change within our business and within the kids' desires within the family dynamic of the business change in such a short period of time. And I'm sure it's going to change a million more. I mean, Jagger's 17. Right now, he wants to do it. But what happens if he gets married and they move, like they want to move? Like all the things can happen.
What if his wife wants to live in Hawaii?
I know, right? We just don't know. And I know and in our situation, there is the outside dynamics of their mom. And I know that maybe she does, or maybe she doesn't want kids involved in the business that stepmom started. Like, you just don't know, right? Well, I mean, I know, but there's always those extra dynamics that come into play. And so I think we just need to get something on paper, get the conversation going, get it figured out, because we also want to make sure that we're not excluding my niece and nephew, who's also Jay's niece and nephew, from some sort of plan should something happen to Jay and I, and just making sure that everybody's protected. And the interesting thing that has been talked about, succession planning, is just that conversation at farming, like events and conferences and stuff, is just so huge right now. And I was at a conference recently, and they were saying, like, this is a really great time to get into farming, which I always am like, do you know farming? No, I'm just kidding. But they were like, it's a really great time to get into farming and go work for somebody else's farm, because the median age of farmers is getting older, and so few of them have somebody to pass their farm down to. And they're saying that, if you can get into a management position at a farm, you may end up being the one who can purchase out these businesses because there's no one to leave them to. And I was like, that is a dynamic I hadn't even really thought of at all.
I would love to unpack that, because why don't you have anyone to take it on? And here, this gets me hot, like boiling mad, thinking about how many farms and ranches and rural businesses could have been generational, are profitable, have massive assets, like everything working in their favor, and do not have someone to hand it down to because their kids were not given the opportunity or had the conversations of, this is what it could look like. This is the opportunity you can choose. And if you don't hear that, and I'm looking at this truly through the lens of the person that left feeling like there wasn't a place on the ranch for me, is if you don't have that conversation with them when they're choosing things in life, don't be surprised when they're 50 years old with their own jobs and their partners at a firm somewhere and their kids are in high school and they can't pick up and come back to the ranch and they don't want to.
Yes. And that is one thing.
Have the conversation.
That is one thing I'm going to pat Jay and I on the back for, because we sat both kids down individually in high school. Like Jagger, just recently we sat down because he's in grade 12. Georgia, we sat down when she was in grade 12. Dayton used to work for us, so we had that conversation with him too. Paige immediately from very young knew she didn't want to. She's in equestrian. She's doing her thing. She's traveling all over North America. It's totally her vibe. But the other kids, we sat down and it was very like, here's what our business looks like. We're very transparent with them in the revenue numbers, in what that looks like. And then we sat down with, okay, if you want to stay with the family business, we can create this position for you within the company. But also, hey, like I know with Georgia, we were like, hey, if we open a retail spot in the Windsor, you could be the buyer for a Western boutique in the Windsor, and you could be going to Vegas and going to buying shows and doing that. Or if you want to put Airbnb cabins on the ranch, we can help you get loans for that. And that could kind of be your diversification. For Jagger, it's the same. Like we've had those conversations with the kids of what could that look like for you if you wanted to stay in this, and maybe you want to stay in it. But I mean, I can't retire now. I'm 38. Like that's not, I can't just all of a sudden give them my wage, like give them my income. But here's ways that we can pay you a wage within the business, or here's ways that you can diversify out from the assets we already own to generate revenue as your own small business. Or you do half and half, you're salaried by the farm, and here are some things. So that is the one thing that I feel really good about, that we confidently gave the kids opportunities and tried to give them suggestions and opportunities that were really tailored towards what they would like to be involved in and their personal interests. And I think that's been really, like, that helped them make a decision that was at least informed on whether or not they wanted to do that. And honestly, I think one of them is willing and interested in being self-employed, and one of them does not want to be self-employed.
I think that's the start though, right? The conversation is necessary. And if you're not having the conversation, trying to start the conversation when emotions are already tense, when there's already made business decisions are made on quicksand, for lack of a better word, and then you're trying to solidify what it is that you're busting your back to build upon, makes it very hard. If there is one thing that I could leave people with you cannot necessarily control like the generation above you, the older generation, right? They are your parents, they are your grandparents, they are in a position of authority over you. You can only control what happens with the generation below you and having that conversation. But those were the worst situations to respond to. The very worst when there was no plan, there was no documentation, there was nothing in paperwork, and Uncle Sam is going to take a huge bite of it, and they're going to be tied up with lawyers, and no one has any idea how to handle it or what's supposed to be done. That was the worst. The next worst was we had a plan, no one knew what that was, and now we're going to drop the bomb on the family dynamic of out of left field, great Uncle Joe, who lives 7 states away, is getting the farm. And you're just like, what? Where? How? What? Nobody ever said that was what was in the will in the safe. Nobody ever talked about this. I've been killing myself for 30 years here. Like, what? That was the second worst, was that there was a plan, but no one knew what it was, and nobody talked about it, and no one was prepared for it. And then the third worst is a plan that's created, but is created with conflict in the family. Because then there's this sort of, now we're living in conflict, even though it could change, it could get better, it could not. I don't know that there's a magic answer to this.
Yeah, or making a plan and then sticking it in the drawer and forgetting about it, and fast forward, the entire family dynamic, business dynamic, and everything has changed, which is where I sit right now. I have a will, but it is 9 years old. I mean, we have completely different properties, completely different business. The kids are grown. Like, it doesn't account for a lot of those unique little quirks that really need to be ironed out.
That has to be. I think of a will as a living document that has to be touched. I don't think it's a bad idea yearly. I mean, I guess it depends on how fast your business is moving, or if you're expanding, or anytime there's a significant life increase. And that doesn't even mean you need to go in and pay $500 an hour to an attorney. Maybe the first time, to make sure that it's drafted right, and then ask them, what do you need to do if I want to add something in? Is it as simple as me writing up a piece of paper and sending it into your office? Do you ask them? It's going to be different in every state, every country. There's tax implications. It's like a giant spider web, in that the business formation will affect the inheritance, which will affect the tax implications. It goes out. And none of what we're talking about is legal or tax advice. By all means, please pay for an expert. Please.
I'm not a lawyer, nor am I an accountant.
We are not giving you any professional advice in that sense. We're saying it is worth it if you are building a business, if there is property, if there is things like that, get something in writing. Because if I could stress upon you one thing, it would be that emergencies happen all the time. It is inevitable. You are going to die at some point. Everyone is.
And wouldn't you like to be able to set it up the best as possible for the people in your family? So when that day comes, hopefully when you're old and gray, but that your family gets to grieve without the added stress and tension of not knowing what a plan was, or there not having been a plan in place. And I think that's where we're at. We need to come up with something that has all parties understanding what will happen when that day comes. Thank you for listening to this episode. We know there are only so many hours in the day, so we're honored you choose to spend some of your time with us. If you're one of the many rural women entrepreneurs who are struggling to find true community and step-by-step support that actually moves the needle in your business, join our signature group coaching program, the Workhorse Collective. You can find more information in the show notes of today's episode.
Together, we've set out to support and connect with women in rural business. If you found this episode valuable, we'd love it if you'd share with another woman in your circle. It would also be incredibly helpful if you would take a moment to leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and we'll catch you next time on the Workhorse Podcast.